Hi, my name's Kaylin. My family told me I was crazy, for asking about money I never saw, for remembering things they swore never happened. But it all started at Thanksgiving, when my mother, in front of everyone, asked what I did with the $200,000 my father left me. I didn't even know it existed. Turns out, that was just the first crack in a much bigger lie. Fake signatures, erased voicemails. A trust fund I was written out of by my own mother and sister. They sold off my legacy behind my back, made me question my sanity. Now I'm wondering how many others like me are out there. What if your family wasn't just keeping secrets? What if you were the secret they were keeping? Thanksgiving in our house always followed a predictable rhythm, one that let me hide in plain sight. The smell of roasted turkey clung to the air like a quilt, wrapping around the creaky old rooms of Mom's Missouri home. The kitchen buzzed with activity, Aunt Drusilla barking instructions like a drill sergeant, while my younger sister Callista floated between conversations, always the golden one. I took my usual seat at the end of the dining table, close enough to nod along, far enough to not be noticed. After a decade in the Air Force, deployed to places most people couldn't find on a map, I'd come to value silence, the kind that hung in comm rooms at 0300, the kind that followed a coded transmission. But here the noise was a different kind, domestic, chaotic, unfiltered. "Pass the mashed potatoes, honey," Mom said, voice light but eyes scanning me like she was decoding encrypted text. I handed the bowl across, offering a tight smile, and then it came. "So, honey, what did you ever do with your $200,000? The fork in my hand stopped mid-air. Time paused, like the world had buffered mid-transmission. "What?" I managed, my voice thinner than I liked. Everyone froze. Callista dropped her wine glass. The shatter echoed too loudly. Aunt Drusilla's hand clenched around her linen napkin. Nolan, Callista's fiancé, cleared his throat and studied his plate like it held all the answers. What money?" I asked, careful to keep my voice calm, my years in uniform kicking in. "Control the room. Stay on frequency." Mom blinked. "The money from your father's trust. You said you were going to use it for flight school, $200,000. Don't you remember?" My stomach flipped. "I think you've got the wrong daughter." Callista was quick to jump in, her tone sugary. "Mom probably meant that old savings bond Dad talked about. Remember that?" But Mom shook her head, firmly. "No. Your father left each of you $200K. It was in the trust. I handed you both the documents after the funeral, remember?" I didn't. I remembered the funeral in unbearable detail. The flag folded with mechanical precision. The salute that broke me. But no documents. No trust. "No money." Gaslight, part of my brain whispered. But the other part, trained, disciplined, told me to shut up and gather intel. I laughed nervously, my voice cracking. "Honestly, I think you're mixing me up with Callista. I never got anything like that." "You did," Mom insisted. "I remember you saying you'd apply to that aviation program in Dallas." "I never applied to any aviation school, Mom." Her brow furrowed. "You told me—" "I didn't," I cut in, more forcefully than I intended. My heart was pounding now, not from emotion, but from the sharp edge of tactical alertness. Something was off, deeply off. "Maybe let's not argue about money right now," Callista offered, smiling at Nolan like she hadn't just helped rewrite a major chapter of my life. I excused myself, muttering something about the oven. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, my breath shallow. My mind replayed conversations with Dad all those years ago. He'd talked vaguely about taking care of us, about setting up something special. But I never saw anything concrete. Nothing came my way. If there was money, it never reached me. My hands shook. Was this early memory loss? Had I signed something and forgotten? Or worse, had someone else made decisions for me? After dinner, while Callista and Nolan loaded the dishwasher and Mom chatted with Aunt Drusilla about cranberry sauce, I slipped into the study. The room still smelled like Dad, leather, old books, cedar. I crouched before the old filing cabinet and pulled open the bottom drawer. It groaned, resistant from age. There, near the back, was a tan folder, crisp despite the years. The label read, Trust Kaylin Callista. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. I placed my hand on the file, unaware that once I opened it, my entire family would never look the same again. The house was still. The kind of stillness that only happens after midnight, when even the wind outside seems to tiptoe past the windows. I stood in Mom's study, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting a halo over the battered old filing cabinet. My breath was shallow, my heart pounding against my ribs like a warning drum. I knelt in front of the bottom drawer, the one she always kept locked. But tonight, in her rush to refill the wine glasses or maybe to keep her secrets close, she'd left the key in. I pulled it open and there it was. A pale manila folder labeled in her sharp, tidy handwriting. Trust, Kaylin, Callista. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Just touching it felt like a betrayal. But betrayal had already found me. At a dinner table, no less. The papers inside smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Legal language, thick and dry, filled the first few pages. Disbursement statements, check images. Then, I froze. A copy of a signed withdrawal form from our family trust. Signed by me, or at least someone pretending to be me. The signature was close, but not mine, too careful, too rehearsed. The C looped a little too tightly, the S at the end, shaky. Someone had studied my handwriting, practiced it. I flipped through the stack. Every page bore the same imposter scrawl. Callista. Had to be her. She always spent hours at Dad's office as a teenager, shadowing his attorney friend Mr. Fremont, sipping Sprite from his bar cart and pretending to understand estate law. Meanwhile, I was outside in the driveway, learning how to fix a carburetor with Dad. I knew engines. She knew signatures. I sat back on my heels, bile rising in my throat. The walls closed in, thick with the scent of old wood and deception. Did Mom know? Was she in on it? The house groaned softly as it settled. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every page. My thumb shook over the camera button, but I kept going. My instincts, the same ones that kept me alive in tents in Kandahar and calm rooms in Kuwait, whispered, "Don't confront yet. Not until you're sure." Back in my old room, the phone buzzed softly as I backed up the images to the cloud. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen, tired and different from the woman who left for basic training at 19. I was good at war, but this was a family ambush. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen like nothing had changed. "Good morning," Callista chirped, pouring coffee into a mug with flowers on it. My mug. Mom glanced up from the toaster. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sleep okay, hun?" "Yeah," I lied, slipping into a chair. "Thanks." Callista reached over, laying a hand on mine. Too warm, too perfect. "You always were such a deep sleeper." I noticed her wrist as she reached for the butter. That watch, Dad's old Omega, he'd promised it to me, said it was going in the lockbox with my name on it. She had told me years ago it had been lost in shipping when the estate was divided. Now it ticked away on her wrist. They don't just take your name, they steal your memories and wear them like jewelry. I stirred my coffee, the spoon clinking softly. My smile was polite. My rage was not. Later that afternoon, I stepped out into the chilly air and walked 3 blocks to a payphone. Couldn't risk anything traceable. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Jeanette, Dad's old paralegal. She used to bring us sugar cookies at the office and always let me press the buttons on the fax machine. The line clicked, then a familiar voice answered. "Jeanette speaking. It's Kaylin Stevens." A pause. Then warmth. "Oh, sweetheart, been a long time." "Yeah," I said, voice tight. "Jeanette, do you remember the trust my dad set up for me and Callista?" "I do. You girls were each left $200,000. Your dad was proud of that. I need to ask, did I ever come in to sign anything? Withdraw anything?" Another pause. "No, honey. I remember you didn't show. Your sister said you were out of the country. Some deployment, I think, but someone came in with your ID. My throat went dry. And signed as me? I'm afraid so. I always thought it was strange, but Mr. Fremont handled it. Someone hadn't just taken my money. They'd taken my place. They'd stepped into my shoes and started walking my life without me. Rain fell in soft, persistent sheets the day I turned 11. A quiet, cold betrayal from the sky that felt all too familiar. I stood under the high windows of my school auditorium, clutching a paper poppy pinned to my dress, waiting for Mom to finally arrive. It was Veterans Day. The auditorium was packed with proud parents, but the empty seat beside me felt like a high-profile absence. After the ceremony, I wandered through the hallways looking for her. I found her instead at the church's brunch, cheerfully reuniting with neighborhood ladies, not a single trace of apology in her laughter. Callista was there too, dressed in perfect poise, and when she saw me, she brushed past, barely scolding. She couldn't make it, sweetie. You know how she is. That moment lived in me for years, being the independent one, as Callista always called me. It wasn't independence, it was being erased. Now, years later, I stood in my small Colorado Springs apartment, nursing the same wounded memory as I stared at the pictures I'd piled on my desk. The image from the filing cabinet, the trust folder labeled Trust Kaylin Callista, replayed in my mind. The realization finally clicked. This was no accident or neglect. It was calculated, strategic. It wasn't just emotional absence. It was systematic erasure. My throat constricted with rage and resolve. For years, I didn't protest because I believed in my father's quiet justice. For years, I stayed silent because I thought, I'm strong enough to rise above this. But I owed it to him and to myself to document everything. The first ink on the journal felt bitter. Names, dates, conversations, little things I'd brushed off. The way Callista always got the front seat at family pictures. The way Mom corrected my pronunciation of thank you until I sounded more like her. Brick by brick, I'd been removed from my own narrative. If they built the lie, I'd tear it down. Later that night, in the stillness of my bedroom, I replayed a voicemail that had weighed on me for months. Dad's voice, tinny but warm. Don't let them talk you out of checking the safe. Your name's on that letter for a reason. The finality, the love in that voice, it hit me harder than any betrayal. My breath caught. That letter had vanished the day after his funeral. I remembered the locked cabinet, Dad's faded signature on the deed. I remembered being too grief-stricken to question the missing folder labeled Kaylin. My father warned me, and then he was gone. The mess following was no misunderstanding. It was a slow, deliberate erasure of the daughter he promised to protect. Suddenly, the silence in my apartment felt deafening. The past and present merged into one truth. I was not invisible. I had been forgotten, and left to find my way back. The attic creaked under my feet, each step echoing like a whisper from the past. Charleston's early morning mist still clung to the trees outside, casting long shadows through the narrow attic window. I hadn't been back to my father's house since the funeral. Too many memories packed into corners, sealed in silence. But I had something now that I didn't have then, a reason to search. The old brass key Dad had given me before his final deployment had never fit anything in our family home. He'd handed it to me like it was nothing, just another keepsake, yet said, "You'll know when to use it." I never had, until now. I crouched in the farthest corner, dust coating my jeans, and ran my hand along the floorboards. My fingers found a slight depression, the wood warped in just the right way to suggest something hidden. I pried it loose. Beneath it sat a small wall-mounted safe. My hands trembled as I inserted the key. A satisfying click, then the door creaked open, empty, except for faint scratch marks inside, like someone had dug their fingers into the walls trying to grab at something that had already been taken. My heart pounded. I had come hoping for Dad's letter, the one he'd told me about in that voicemail. But someone had gotten here before me. Someone knew exactly what to look for. I sat back on my heels, cold sinking into my bones. Not from the attic, but from the growing realization that the lies ran deeper than I thought. I needed answers. Mr. Levins's office smelled like mothballs and old printer toner. He greeted me with a nervous smile, his balding head shining under the fluorescent lights. Dad had trusted him for years, always said he was the one numbers guy who still had a soul. I wasn't here to test that theory, I was here to crack it. So, I began. I've been going through Dad's things. I came across a few notes about a revised trust. Something about my name being added back in. He blinked. Excuse me? You know, the one where both Callista and I were supposed to receive equal shares. His lips parted like he might respond, but no words came. Then too quickly he shook his head. I don't handle estate revisions. That would have gone through Fremont. I just filed reports. That's funny, I said, leaning forward, because Dad always mentioned your involvement, especially with the final draft. He said you'd witnessed something. His pen slipped from his hand. There it was. Listen, Mr. Levins, I continued, voice low. Someone erased me, not just from the documents, but from my own father's intentions. And I have every reason to believe you know who. His mouth opened again, this time letting out a long sigh. There was a change, your father insisted. But the signed copy, the one with your name, it disappeared from the office after he passed. Fremont said it never existed, but I saw it. I signed it myself. Who took it? He wouldn't meet my eyes. I can't say for sure. But I could. And her name was already forming on my tongue. That night, I sat in my car, parked in front of the apartment I'd been renting for years. The voicemail still lived in a folder titled Dad on my phone, untouched for 2 years, until now. I hit play. Kaylin, his voice came through, rough with sleep or maybe illness. Don't let them talk you out of checking the safe. Your name's on that letter for a reason. If anything happens to me, don't trust what they show you. Trust what you know. I let the silence hang. Then I whispered. I wasn't paranoid. I was erased. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, but the fury was growing too loud. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a coordinated effort to write me out of my own story, and I had no plans to let that stand. The call came just after midnight. Kaylin? The voice on the other end was older, raspy but sharp. Aunt Marion? I know we haven't spoken in a long time, but your father trusted me with something. I think it's time you had it. What is it? A pause. Not over the phone. Come to Savannah, I'll explain everything. Savannah, the city of moss-draped secrets. I didn't hesitate. I'll be on the next flight, I said. Good, she replied. Before someone finds out I called. As the line disconnected, I felt the tremor of urgency pulse in my chest. There was more, so much more, that they'd kept hidden, but if Aunt Marion held the missing piece, I was ready to collect it. Savannah met me like an old lullaby, soft, slow, and thick with memory. The taxi ride from the airport weaved beneath live oaks whose long limbs curled like stories waiting to be told. Spanish moss hung in gray drapes, brushing the windshields of parked cars, whispering secrets. I hadn't been here in years, not since Dad brought me for a father-daughter weekend when I was 13. Back then, we ate pralines by the Riverwalk and rode bikes through Forsyth Park. Now, I was back not for sweetness, but for truth. Aunt Marion's house sat quietly on a narrow street, pale yellow with blue shutters and an iron gate wrapped in jasmine. She opened the door before I could knock. You look like him, she said softly, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she opened her arms, and I fell into them. It was a rare thing to be held like someone who mattered. Inside, her home smelled of cinnamon and paper. Bookshelves lined the walls, and I noticed the same black and white photo of her and Dad at the beach tucked into a frame near the fireplace. Come, she said, leading me to a small kitchen where tea was already steeping. We sat at her oak table, light filtering through lace curtains. I suppose you want to see it, she said, reaching into a drawer by the sink. She laid it before me like it was sacred. A letter. The same brittle fold Dad had mentioned in his voicemail. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Kaylin, if you're reading this, it means something's gone wrong. You deserve to know that I never meant for you to be left out. There's a trust, a second one, meant only for you. I left instructions with Marion and with Fremont. Don't let them tell you otherwise. You were always the strong one. That's why I trusted you the most. Love you, kid. Dad. The tears came before I realized they had. Marion watched quietly. I didn't want to get involved, she said, but when Fremont stopped returning my calls and your mother began spreading lies about you being unstable, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I wasn't unstable, I said. I was alone. We drank in silence for a few minutes before Marion cleared her throat. Let's talk about what you're going to do. What I'm going to do, I echoed. Yes, she said firmly. You're not going to let them pretend you don't exist. It was surreal, role-playing a confrontation I hadn't dared imagine. I stood in her hallway like it was my mother's kitchen, channeling every slight, every dismissal, every stolen piece of my life. You didn't just take my inheritance, I said to the phantom of my sister. You took my story. You stole my place in this family. Again, Marion said from behind me, stronger this time. I tried again, voice steadier. You wore my watch. You cashed my money. You used my name. Marion nodded. Good. Again. We rehearsed until my voice no longer cracked. I didn't cry. I didn't cower. I stood up straight and looked the ghost of Callista in the eye. That night, before I left, Marion opened a small tin box from the back of her closet. Inside was a key on a leather string. The letters CS were engraved faintly along the side. This is yours, she said. It was meant for you. What does it open? The safe, the one your father had built into his old tool bench in the garage. He showed me the day before he died. Said he didn't trust anyone else but you. I was supposed to give it to you, when you were ready. I cradled the key in my palm, cold, small, but heavy with meaning. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It wasn't even about money. It was about identity, about the right to exist without explanation. I slipped the key onto my necklace, tucked it beneath my shirt. It pressed against my skin like a promise. I realized then, this key isn't just metal. It's my lifeline to justice. I hadn't seen the house in daylight in years. Somehow it looked smaller now, calm, like a shell of the chaos it once contained. The Charleston heat clung to my skin as I stepped from the car, the key from Aunt Marion tucked tightly in my palm. I'd parked down the street, keeping my return quiet. According to Callista's Instagram story, she and Mom were at the gala venue doing final touches. Good. I needed time. The front door creaked open like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was thick, the way it always was in August, no matter how high the air conditioning ran. I moved quickly, bypassing the creaky floorboards, making my way to Dad's office at the back of the house. The room was exactly as he'd left it, except for the layer of dust and the sense that his presence had been wiped clean. The fireproof chest sat like a tombstone beneath his old desk. I dropped to my knees, slid the key in, and turned. The lock gave way with a dull click. Inside were three things: a folded legal-sized envelope with my name on it in Dad's unmistakable handwriting, a slim black flash drive, and a document bound in red string, a second copy of his will. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe. I grabbed everything and left the house in under 5 minutes. I parked a few blocks away, hands shaking as I turned the envelope over in my lap. The seal cracked, fragile with age, like it had been waiting for this moment too. Kaylin, the letter began. I didn't want it to come to this. I hoped you'd never need this letter. But I knew if you did, it meant something went very wrong. If you're reading this, it means you've already discovered some of it. But you deserve the whole truth. He spoke of Mom and Callista, not with cruelty, but caution. He'd begun to suspect manipulation when he fell ill, noticing that documents went missing, appointments were rescheduled without his input, and financial advisors changed abruptly. I tried to make changes to the trust. I moved some funds. The flash drive has everything: the routing numbers, account names, backups of every email I could gather. Your inheritance is still yours. They may have stolen your name, but not your future. I pressed the letter to my lips and exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't forgotten. I was deliberately silenced. Within the hour, I'd backed up the files from the flash drive to 3 encrypted drives. One was already in the mail to my lawyer. Another was sent electronically to a probate court contact through a secure upload. The third, sent to Daniel, my old military friend who'd once gone viral for exposing a vet scam on his blog. If anything happens to me, I wrote in the email, publish this. Don't wait. I sat in my car afterward, lighting a small candle. Not for Dad. He'd given me everything he could, even in death. I lit it for myself. For every year I spent wondering if I mattered. My phone buzzed. A message from Callista. We need to talk, tonight, at the house. No smiley faces. No extra hearts or exclamation points. Just sharp edges. I stared at the screen, then folded Dad's letter and placed it in my jacket pocket. I started the car. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The letter pressed firm against my chest like armor. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the circular drive of the house I once called home. The porch light was already on, glowing too warmly for the kind of night I suspected was waiting for me inside. I parked, engine idling for a few seconds longer than necessary, my pulse tapping against my wrist like Morse code. Callista's message had been simple. We need to talk. Tonight, at the house. But something was off the moment I saw the driveway. Every spot was taken. Uncle Grant's rust-colored SUV, Pastor Elaine's beige Volvo. Even the pearl-white sedan Mom drove to her church luncheons was parked crookedly, like she'd been in a hurry. This wasn't a private talk. This was a gathering, a setup. Still, I opened the door, stepped into the heavy Charleston air, and walked toward the looming white columns. I could already feel the heat of confrontation swelling inside my chest, clashing against my nerves. The door was ajar. That alone would have stopped me in another lifetime. But not tonight. I stepped in. The living room was staged like a sitcom intervention. Circle of chairs, tray of untouched cookies, glasses of sweet tea sweating on coasters. My mom sat primly with her hands folded, Callista next to her, tissue in hand already, mascara faintly smudged for effect. Uncle Grant stood with arms crossed near the fireplace. Pastor Elaine perched on the armrest of a chair like some benevolent observer. Kaylin, Mom said, voice syrupy. We're here because we love you. I didn't sit. Don't. Pastor Elaine gestured toward an open seat. Why don't you take a moment to breathe, sweetheart? This isn't an ambush. That's exactly what an ambush is, I replied flatly. Callista sniffled. We're worried about you. All these accusations. The paranoia. It's not healthy. Paranoia? I raised an eyebrow. You mean evidence? Mom tilted her head. You've been digging into old documents, misinterpreting things. Your father was concerned about your mental health before he passed. He told me. That stopped me. Not because it was true, but because it was so rehearsed, so confidently cruel. They were rewriting history in real time, twisting Dad's memory like taffy until it suited their version of events. Pastor Elaine interjected gently. Grief affects everyone differently. Maybe some spiritual guidance. I didn't come here for a sermon, I said, voice cutting sharper than I intended. I came because Callista said she wanted to talk. Callista stood now, voice rising. You're threatening to destroy this family with your obsession. No, I corrected, stepping forward. You did that when you stole my inheritance. The silence that followed was thick as summer heat. No one blinked, no one moved. From my bag, I slowly pulled the manila folder, the second will, Dad's letter, and the flash drive. I laid them on the coffee table like playing cards at the final round. Mom's eyes flicked to the letter. Then, quick as a snake, she lunged for it. But I was faster. I grabbed it back and stepped away. Lie one more time, I warned, voice level. And this goes straight to the state attorney. Uncle Grant looked like he might say something, but thought better of it. Pastor Elaine's expression twisted into something more rigid. And Callista, for once, her tears dried up. I scanned their faces. For years, I'd let them define me. The independent one, the cold one, the soldier too serious to feel. But now I saw it clearly. I wasn't the fragile one. I was the threat. I didn't need them to admit guilt tonight. I just needed them to see that I wasn't backing down. I turned to leave. That's when Callista's voice followed me, sharp and venomous. You just made the worst mistake of your life. I paused in the doorway, glanced back with a calm I barely felt. We'll see whose life it ruins first. And then I walked out, into the night, into the storm I had every intention of surviving. The play of shadows in my mind mirrored what I saw through the window of Aunt Marla's dining room. Shadows lengthened around the oaks, wrapping the night in a tense hush. The room smelled faintly of apple pie and candles, illusions of warmth in the sudden stillness. I'd agreed to this dinner, thinking perhaps it was peace offering. But peace isn't found at the bottom of a second glass of wine. You find it when the lies are laid bare. The table was set for 6. Aunt Marla sat at the head, candlelight dancing in her eyes. Between her and my father's chair, there were spaces for 2, Callista and Mom, though they sat on either side of me, their posture awkward, unreadable. After dessert, I cleared my throat. The ceiling fan whirred above like the last breath of the evening. I asked to be here because I wanted truth, I began. Dad left a letter for me, one he didn't expect I'd read. He updated his will. He named me. I slid the letter across the table. Ink had yellowed, the paper thin with memory. As I spoke, their faces shifted, shock, then recognition. Your father changed his mind, I said, voice quiet but unyielding. It wasn't written by mistake or drafted under someone's influence. He wanted his daughter, me, to have what he intended from the start. Aunt Marla's voice trembled. I don't know what to say. Uncle Grant looked down, guilt bleeding into his posture. I'd like to see that, he whispered, gesturing to the letter. A pause worth lifetimes passed, then Callista slammed her glass down. The sound cracked the veneer of civility. You knew how he felt, she spat. You knew he wanted you there, and you told him I said you refused. One sentence. That was the betrayal I never saw. Not just the damaged friendship or the money stolen. The messages, suppressed, erased. I mourned my father without knowing I'd already been exiled. I lifted the glass of wine in my hand and hurled it at her. It shattered against the china cabinet, shards of memory and lies. Before anyone could react, I turned and walked out. My steps were fast, sure. Outside, the driveway glowed with porch light and guilt. I started towards my car when the door opened behind me. Mom's voice, careful and small. Kaylin. I stopped but didn't turn. She stepped forward. I helped her. The words came, deliberate and cold. I thought you'd waste it all anyway, on charity, on people, on second chances. I wanted to save what our reputation had. Tears pooled in my eyes, but I refused them. You chose image over daughter, over truth. With that, I pressed the key fob. My car door unlocked. I dropped the letter and the flash drive into the front seat, never looking back. I dialed my lawyer. Call me first thing in the morning. I drove away from the estate, heart rattled but resolute. I held the steering wheel tighter than usual. It felt less like control and more like conviction. When I reached home, I put the flash drive in my safe. And for the first time in so long, I let myself exhale. Then knock, 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 3 sharp taps on the door, like a verdict. When I opened the door that morning, I wasn't expecting anyone. But there stood Uncle Grant, tired eyes, a folder clutched in both hands, and something fragile in the way he carried his silence. "I thought you might slam the door in my face," he said. "I considered it," I replied, stepping aside. He walked in slowly, like he was entering a church rather than my small condo. We sat opposite each other in the kitchen nook, the same place I'd cried over bank statements and Dad's voicemail weeks earlier. He placed the folder between us, untouched. "I've read everything," he said. "The letters, the will, even the digital stuff you gave the lawyer. It was like looking into a mirror I didn't want to admit existed." I didn't speak. I needed to hear what he'd come to say. Grant inhaled, and then exhaled the truth he'd been hiding. "There was a second letter. Your father gave it to me years ago, in case things fell apart. I didn't give it to you because," his voice cracked, "because I thought it would shatter everything. And maybe I was protecting them more than I was protecting you." I unfolded the brittle paper he handed me. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Kaylin, if this reaches you, then something has gone wrong. I feared they'd try to control things after I passed. I knew your mother and sister could twist intentions when they felt threatened. But I trusted Grant. And now I trust you'll do what's right." I looked up at my uncle. "He trusted you, and you hid this." "I did," he admitted, shame coloring every word. "But I won't anymore." His words didn't erase the years, but they softened something hardened inside me. By Thursday, I was sitting across from the estate lawyer. This time I wasn't alone or confused. I had the original letter from Dad, the revised will, backup documents, a printed transcript of the voicemail, and the flash drive containing his video diary, recovered with Uncle Grant's help from an old hard drive Dad had stored in his woodworking shed. The lawyer scanned the materials, brows slowly rising. "Miss Summers," he said carefully, "you have more than a case. You have a narrative, a compelling one." That's all I ever wanted. Not revenge, not money, just my story in the light where it belonged. We began formal proceedings. Whether I would win in court wasn't certain. But I knew now, I wasn't alone. I had proof. I had people willing to say they were wrong. And for the first time, I had my voice in the record. That Sunday, I returned to the memory center where I'd volunteered for years, before everything blew up. The garden was nearly the same, save for the autumn leaves that carpeted the ground like faded confetti. I walked toward the old birch tree. Years ago, I'd planted it with a group of residents. A man with Parkinson's had held the sapling upright while I shoveled dirt. He'd laughed and said, "Life's what you bury, so you better pick something that wants to grow." At the base of the tree, I brushed away the leaves until I found the stone plaque I had once placed there, now dull with time. I had etched the words myself. "In memory of all things we plant in silence and love in return." That plaque had been removed after Mom found out. She said it was too sentimental, too personal. But today, I brought it back and pressed it into the earth with steady hands. I whispered, "You don't get to erase me anymore." That night, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something urged me to answer. "Hi. Is this Kaylin Summers?" the voice asked. Young, unsure. "Yes, speaking." "My name's Elise. I think my father worked for yours a long time ago. He passed a few years back, but before he died, he left a package and a note. He told me, 'Only give it to Kaylin. She'll know what it means and why it had to stay buried until now.'" My mouth went dry. "Where are you calling from?" "Greenville, South Carolina," she said. "Can we meet?" I stared out the window, the garden lights outside casting soft shadows on the patio. I thought I had unearthed everything. But maybe the roots went even deeper. "I'll be there," I said. I met Elise in a little cafe just off the downtown Tulsa bus terminal, the kind of place where nobody asks questions and the coffee tastes like burnt honesty. She was already there when I arrived, her hands curled around a chipped mug, eyes flicking nervously toward the entrance every time the bell above the door jingled. She looked like someone who had carried a story too long, her shoulders heavy with unshed truth. When I sat down, she pushed a small wooden box across the table between us. No words, just that gesture. "My mom," she said finally, "kept this hidden. She worked for your dad near the end." The box wasn't locked, but the lid creaked like it hadn't been opened in years. Inside, nestled among old receipts and yellowed notepaper, was a ledger. Handwritten, carefully bound. I touched it with the reverence of someone about to shake hands with a ghost. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. Elise looked up, her voice quiet but steady. "Because my mom said if anything ever happened to her, that your dad wanted you to know he tried." That sentence hit like a brick to the ribs. The ledger was damning. Page after page of entries, hush payments, off-the-books bank accounts, cryptic notations like Oaks Hall, 7K silence, and C threatened estate. There were pages dated months before his death, full of names I didn't recognize, and some I did, like Pastor Elaine, listed next to a transaction labeled Reputation Consult. And then the line that stopped my heart cold: "If something happens to me, let my daughter know I tried." That night, I didn't sleep. I spread the pages across my kitchen table, my eyes scanning line after line, each one tightening a noose around a version of my life I had once believed was true. I found entries referencing properties I didn't know Mom owned: lakefront condos in Georgia, a business in someone else's name in North Carolina. There were people listed with payments I remembered nothing about. And then a note. "NJ firm withdrawal," Callista advised. "Keep C in dark." I read it 3 times before whispering it aloud. This wasn't neglect. It was a strategy. The next day, I drove to see Uncle Grant. He didn't answer the door at first, but when he saw it was me, his face drained of color. We sat in his study, him clasping his knees like a guilty child waiting to be scolded. "You knew about the ledger," I said. He nodded, silent. "You let them erase me." Tears welled in his eyes. I thought, "Your mother said you weren't stable enough to handle it. She said you'd ruin yourself trying to chase ghosts." "And you believed her?" I asked, my voice ablade. "I didn't want to choose sides," he said. "I thought I was protecting you, but the truth is, I was just protecting myself." Then he stood and opened a drawer behind his desk. From it, he pulled out a small velvet bag and handed it to me. Inside was a brass key, old but polished. "Your father, he had a deposit box in Dallas. He planned to give you the key when you turned 30. But after he passed, your mother told me not to mention it. I'm sorry, Kaylin." I left without saying another word. In my car, I turned the key over in my palm, its teeth catching the fading sunlight. "If what's in that box is what I think it is," I whispered, "this family is about to fall apart. For good." The road to Dallas stretched long and quiet under a gray Texas sky, the air as heavy as my thoughts. I drove alone, the kind of alone that doesn't come from solitude, but from knowing that even if the car were full, I'd still be the only one carrying this truth. The kind of alone my father must have felt when he realized what was being stolen from him, what was being stolen from me. The miles passed with the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional whisper of wind against the windows. I remembered Dad at my high school graduation, how he stood apart from the crowd, hands folded, clapping slowly with that sad little smile. He wasn't a man who wore his feelings loudly, but something in his eyes that day told me he had so much more to say. He never got the chance. By the time I pulled up in front of the bank in downtown Dallas, the sun was sliding behind the buildings. The vault clerk, a middle-aged man with polite eyes and a name tag that read Troy, guided me into the back without question. He checked my ID, nodded once, and handed me a key. Box 719. It clicked open with a quiet, metallic sigh. Inside was a stack of letters bound in twine, a yellowed Polaroid of me as a toddler, held in my father's lap with a woman I didn't recognize but who stirred something deep in my gut, and a small cassette recorder. My breath caught in my throat. My hand shook as I pressed play. "If you're hearing this," my father's voice crackled through the tiny speaker, low and hoarse. "Then they succeeded in shutting me out, but not you, not forever." I sank to the cold tile floor, the box at my feet, the recorder clutched tight as if it might vanish. He continued, voice unsteady. "Kaylin, I tried. God knows I tried. The things they said about you, about me. It wasn't true. None of it. Your mother and Grant, they weren't protecting you. They were protecting themselves." I played it again in my motel room just a few blocks away, again and again. On that tape, he laid it all out. He talked about how, in the final months of his life, he'd suspected something was wrong, that the lawyer he trusted had suddenly stopped returning his calls, that Grant, my uncle, had convinced him to rest, to focus on peace. Meanwhile, the will was being rewritten behind closed doors, his assets reassigned, his voice erased. "You were meant to inherit everything," he said. "She changed the will 3 weeks after I died, using a notary who never even met me." I stared at the letters from the box, their edges worn like they'd been handled too many times. They weren't dated in order, but one caught my eye, marked, "For when you doubt your worth." Inside, he wrote about the first time he saw me in the hospital. How I opened one eye and gripped his pinky with more strength than he thought possible. "That's my girl," he wrote, 10 minutes old and already unafraid. I wept, silently. Not for the money, not even for the betrayal, but for how close I came to never knowing the truth of how deeply I had been loved. And then there was the Polaroid. The woman beside him had a gentle face, slightly turned, her hair catching sunlight through the window behind them. On the back, in Dad's handwriting, "Carmen, 1988. I stared at it, heart pounding. Carmen. The name echoed like a drumbeat from a forgotten room. Carmen. I didn't know a Carmen, at least I didn't think I did. I called Elise. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Elise?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Did your mother ever mention someone named Carmen?" There was a long pause, then a whisper. "Only once." And she whispered it. The silence that followed between us was loaded with something we both understood but couldn't name. I sat there, the tape now still, the photo in my lap, and a truth forming like storm clouds on the horizon. I wasn't just locked out of my father's world. I was locked out of my own identity. The courtroom felt like a cathedral at dawn, golden light sifting through the tall windows, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. The judge looked weary but attentive, a silent witness to a story built brick by painful brick. I stood behind the bar, evidence arrayed before me like armor. One by one, the ledger, the letters, my father's final voicemail, the red-bound will, the flash drive, the video diary, the cassette tape from Dallas. Each piece drove home the truth my family had tried to bury. When I laid them on the judge's desk, I felt the air shift. "This was never about inheritance," I said, voice low but steady. "This was about being seen, and finally being heard." The courtroom held its breath. The next moments felt suspended, until the judge nodded. In his ruling, he acknowledged the updated will as my father's final intent. Callista would lose her claims to the estate, and Vera was facing serious litigation for aiding and forgery. The weight of the decision landed heavily, but it landed in truth. I looked into the gallery. Marion's eyes filled with tears of relief. My lawyer offered a small, proud nod. It wasn't triumph as they show on TV. It was a quiet vindication, the kind that ripples inside your bones. I turned and walked out into the sunlight, every step echoing a little lighter than before. I'd won more than a court ruling. I'd won the truth. Later that afternoon, I stood in the dusty, echoing house in Salt Lake City where my childhood unfolded. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, illuminating spaces I hadn't seen in years. I took the old brass key out of my pocket, one more reminder that secrets don't always stay there. I found Aunt Drusilla sitting in an aging armchair, the world moving around her in new, unexpected ways. I handed her the key, voice soft but sure. Let someone new fill these rooms with good memories. She blinked, then smiled, and I knew letting go didn't mean erasing the past, it meant reclaiming peace. The sky was streaked with pink and golden hues by the time I reached Colorado Springs. My boutique, Carter's Charm, waited for me. Warm lights, floral display, and the quiet hum of possibility. I stepped inside and placed a framed quote from Dad's letter above the counter. Honesty is a gift not owed, but earned. It belonged here, a silent oath that truth and dignity would guide what followed. I closed the boutique door for the evening, inhaling the scent of jasmine-scented candles and fresh linens. Around me, customers had found more than jewelry. They found honesty, resilience, and a woman who insisted on being seen. I walked out into the twilight and paused, not as a concession, but as a promise, to myself and to his memory that no lie would dim our truth again. Some battles aren't fought on fields, but across dinner tables, in hushed conversations, in courtrooms where truth teeters on memory. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence can be just as violent as any lie. What we choose not to confront often becomes the very thing that consumes us. I had to fight not just for money or legacy, but for the right to exist fully in my father's story and in my own. To anyone out there who's been told they're too emotional, too intense, or imagining things, listen to that voice inside. Sometimes it's not paranoia. Sometimes it's your intuition begging to be heard. And healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it's finally walking away with your head high and your truth intact. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight to be seen in your own family, or uncover truths that others wanted hidden? Tell me in the comments, drop a 1 if this story moved you, or share what city or state you're watching from. And if this story didn't quite land for you, I still want to know why. Your perspective matters. If this video touched your heart, inspired you, or simply made you feel less alone, please subscribe to the channel. There are more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see a bit of your own in the ones we share next.